It's that time where I bring on special guests who are movers, influencers, thought leaders, opinion makers in the accounting and fintech world. Thrilled to have with me today, former journalist and one of the world's foremost content creators in this space. It's Nick Huber. Hello, Nick.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
We're splendid. Great to have you with us, Nick. For people that haven't come across you and your work, tell us briefly what your game is.
Right. Well, I'm a couple of things. I mean, I'm a journalist by training and trade, and I'm still a journalist. I write mainly now for the Financial Times, but I also advise companies, including accounting firms and tech firms, on how to produce better content. And a lot of that is what's called sort of thought leadership, long form stuff, such as blogs, white papers, webinars, because I'm sure you're well aware that's becoming one of the main types of marketing now, and ways that companies can promote their brand, grow their brand, get sales leads, and convert those sales leads, and just basically display their authority on various subjects.
Talk to us about the accounting media space, Nick. There's a lot of online platforms. I don't think there's any magazines, paper magazines that go out there anymore, or newspapers. The Financial Times would cover a little bit of tech, obviously, but how much has it changed over the years, and how do you explain how it is right now?
It's yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I started, one of the first kind of jobs I had as a reporter back in the late 90s, back when reporters still got press releases sent by fax, and e-commerce was called electronic commerce. But I started as a reporter for Accountancy Age. It's about 97, 98. And then that was probably the main trade publication for the accountancy profession. Didn't have many direct rivals. That's still the case now. Obviously, there's things like Accounting Web, and the main sort of accountancy institutes have their own publications, but I don't think they'd sort of describe them as sort of independent journalism. And then you had obviously the big national newspapers, and they'd sometimes have people who covered, reporters specializing in professional services, in particular the Financial Times. But I mean, back then it wasn't such a huge, it didn't have such a big media profile. I think certainly the big, well, it's probably about the big 6 or big 7 accounting firms then. They weren't perhaps doing quite as much in the media, and they hadn't really transitioned away from audit to sort of positioning themselves as management consultancies as they have now. But they were still, my impression of certainly the top 10 accounting firms was that they were pretty slick in the media relations and the kind of content they put out.
It's only been until recently that accountants are now able to advertise their services and put out there what they do and tout for business, as we would say. But there's so much noise out there, Nick, now. Everyone's doing it. And you add the vendor agenda, all the tech people out there. We were saying off camera how tech's been added to every vertical, fintech and accounting tech and legal tech and everything else. What do you make of the general tech space?
It's been quite interesting in the last sort of 10 years. You've had a number of big trends. I mean, I think it started off about 10 years ago with this sort of the boom in cloud computing. And as a business reporter, I tend to sort of get commissioned about things which kind of track the hot trends in technology and in business, and what companies are spending on, and what therefore they're advertising on in newspapers and trade magazines. And so there was a lot of stuff about cloud computing, analytics, and then there was things about blockchain. That was going to be the next big thing, but then that didn't seem to really deliver on its potential. And then, of course, recently we've had AI and generative AI, and that's just been incredible how quickly that's grown, or how many users have grown for ChatGPT. And, I'm just writing an article now for a business magazine about ChatGPT, and I'd sort of put a request for comment in for a couple of sort of media platforms. and I've had about 20 responses from PRs in a couple of hours. Just the interest in AI and generative AI is phenomenal. And I think the growth and the influence of the big tech companies is incredible. And now they're sort of under the scrutiny of governments and regulators. And certainly that was very different. And the more technology is sort of totally integral to our lives now. And I think that started with smartphones. But when I was started reporting on technology in the late 90s, it was a lot more pedestrian. I mean, dare I say, a bit boring, but it was basically then more about business software, and the big business software suppliers were kind of mapping business functions, whether that was customer relationship management, ERP, financial, accounting, and basically sort of mirroring that in computer systems. But it was nowhere near as controversial or as interesting as it is now. You didn't have these big tech entrepreneurs who were sort of some of the most famous people in the world, you know, like Elon Musk. That just wasn't around then.
No, the influencers. Well, we're talking today about better content creation in accounting. Just define that term for us, content creation, Nick.
Well, content creation can be anything from, you know, content you create on Twitter or LinkedIn. You might create a sort of, you know, 600-word post or 800-word post on LinkedIn, or it can be a bit more ambitious. It can be sort of long-form content such as white papers. And white papers, I would sort of define as a kind of halfway house between journalism and marketing and advertising. It's, you know, maybe 2,000 words, 2,500 words on an in-depth look at a subject. You might want to push certain messages for your business, but the good white papers are more impartial, and you're interviewing a number of experts for it, not just your experts at your company.
How do accounting firms view content creation? Do they just devolve it to the marketing department, let them get on with it? Or is it a more senior partner decision as to what messages are put out there?
To be honest, I think that a lot of accounting firms don't really do it, or that's my impression. I don't have any statistics for it, but I've been reporting on accounting firms for over 20 years, and there's a big drop-off in quality in terms of the content produced, the blogs, white papers by the big four or the top 10 accounting firms, and then the smaller firms, or even the medium-sized firms. A lot of the medium-sized firms, say in terms of media relations, which is kind of related to content, they won't even have contact details for a press officer on their website. And that's kind of frustrating as a journalist, because sometimes they might have the kind of experts or the profile of people I'd want to interview for an article for a newspaper or business magazine. And if it's a journalist, I just see a contact us form on the website. Forget it. I'll just go to somewhere that has a PR agency or a press officer.
Yeah.
And so I think also, I suppose going back to your question, the kind of content they produce can be a bit pedestrian and a bit of a kind of disguised sales pitch and a bit kind of samey and generic.
Clumsy even.
Yeah.
Yeah, obvious. I know exactly what you mean. But then that comes back to who is driving content creation at that site. From the firms I speak to, they know they need a presence on social media. They know they need fresh content on their website. What that amounts to, you said there's been a drop-off in quality. So the firms that are putting stuff out there that's pretty poor, how would you describe that poor quality?
It's almost like you read it and you think, has some partner or some overworked marketing manager just been roped into producing three blog articles per month, and they view it, or if they get expert partners in the firm to comment on, I don't know, say the future of AI in accounting, it's a bit like for them a trip to the dentist. They know they've got to do it, but they just want to get it over with. And they don't seem to, maybe the marketing people, if these firms employ someone in marketing, understand the importance of content marketing, or what's often called thought leadership. The rest of the firm doesn't, and the rest of the firm, the partners don't even realize that if you do thought leadership correctly, and I'm not a big fan of the term, but it's widely used, but if you do it well, it's not just good for the profile of your firm and your potential business and more sales, it's good for your profile and your career development. But that isn't always widely understood, and I think this is generalizing why, this is generalizing a lot, but I think if you look at sort of the accounting sector, and particularly the small to medium-sized firms, they're a bit more conservative with a small c when it comes to the marketing, the thought leadership and media relations compared to other industries.
Accounting can certainly learn a lot from what's going on out there. There's a huge amount of noise. We know that for sure. And it seems so much easier to produce content now than to assimilate it. The sheer amount of YouTube videos that are going up every day and social media posts, it is bewildering. So it's incumbent upon firms and marketing departments to, if they are going to put stuff out there, ensure that it doesn't just get absorbed in the wall of noise or be tumbleweed that nobody ever sees. If they are going to do that, what should be their guidelines?
Well, I think there's three questions they should ask themselves. And the key thing with good content marketing thought leadership, just keep it simple, silly, or stupid if you want to be a bit rude. The first question is, so what? Why is this new or interesting to our audience? Why should they care? Imagine you just have this thought experiment. Imagine you sort of walk into a busy cafe, it all goes quiet, and then you just say, do you know what? And then you've got to explain your article in one short sentence. Would the people stop what they're doing, stop drinking their flat whites or whatever, and want to know more? Or would they go back to the conversation? You've got to sort of grab the attention as quickly as possible, because when you're competing, when you're publishing content thought leadership for your accounting firm or tech company, you're not just competing with your direct rivals, you're competing with social media, podcasts, computer games, the broadcast media, any number. Everyone in theory is a publisher now, and so the quality has to be much better, and it's much harder to stand out. So that's the first question. The second question is, what do you mean by? And this is probably something I ask as a journalist 5 or 10 times a day if I'm doing a lot of interviews, and that's just making sure that what you're trying to write or the person you're interviewing is saying something that your audience will understand. Sometimes you need to clarify things or get more information. And so I'd say a good rule of thumb is try and write in language that an intelligent 10-year-old would understand. So don't assume that every reader or listener or viewer for your content knows as much about the subject as you. And that's a common flaw in a lot of thought leadership content that I see, whether it's produced by a small business, small accounting firm, or a multi-billion-dollar consultancy. They get so close to the subject that they think that everyone else is as interested in it as they are, or is knowledgeable. So that's the second question. Then the third one is, why now? And the why now is important, because if you can relate what you're writing about to something in the wider news, it could be a big political story, economic story, it could be something in the financial calendar like the tax season or end of financial year tax returns, it makes your content more newsworthy, more interesting. And it also makes it clear why you're writing about something now rather than, say, last month or last year. If you just publish something because you think it's interesting and it's not clearly tied into something bigger, it just looks a bit amateurish.
You talk a lot about BS-free thought leadership content. And we know there's so much hype out there. There's so much hot air in the world that I move in of accounting influencers. These are people selling to and through accountants, from big vendors through consultancies and a range of podcasters, coaches, consultants, trainers. It's all about followers and it's all about numbers. It's not really about the quality of the content. For instance, if you look on LinkedIn now, it's become the Facebook type thing where people are posting a jigsaw that they've completed or a picture of a meal, or it's all very self-congratulatory and personal brand led rather than high quality of content. So talk to us about tips for BS free thought leadership content.
Sure, and that is a problem when everyone is trying to be an influencer, and it all can become a sort of a bit banal, and everything's on surface impressions. I think to really improve the quality of your content, you want to start, I'd say first of all, you don't necessarily need to have lots of focus groups or do lots of research into what your audience wants, because certainly accounting firms, they should have more than enough information already to produce interesting content. You know, they're dealing with, you know, sort of tax returns, businesses that are growing fast, businesses in crisis. When there's a sort of a recession on the way, they'll probably see the early warning signs. They'll be dealing with sort of trying to detect fraud, profit warnings, and they'll get constant feedback from the customers, and so they'll know about market trends before it's probably widely reported on by the media. But I'd say start off by just having a 2 to 3 hour, you can call it a strategy session or a workshop. So just to take a step back and think about what you want to achieve with your content, because your content might be to increase the number of sales leads and conversions, that's fine, but it might also have more specific objectives. You might want to change the perception of your firm from just providing transactional bookkeeping type services to more higher value advisory stuff on M&A or business strategy. And in order to do that, you might want to talk about more business strategy subjects or consultancy. So have this 2 to 3 hour strategy with your sort of head of marketing, some of your key people, review the kind of content you produced, what has worked, what hasn't worked, brainstorm some ideas for new content, put those ideas into categories. So that could be what's called a listicle, you know, 5 tips for, I don't know, better productivity in your business or whatever, or you know, clearer accounts. You could have research, you could have blogs. The more ambitious content could be a webinar or a white paper. And then sort of work out what information you've got for that content and what's missing. And then you can create a schedule for writing it, editing and publishing it, and work out how you're going to do this. So do you have any editorial systems or support? Do you need to appoint a PR agency or marketing agency? A lot of marketing agencies work with experienced business journalists, myself included, and will outsource some of that. And then I'd say create a plan, but just start off slowly, because sometimes when I work with firms and I'll advise them, we'll have this workshop to sort of like create a roadmap for content. Everyone will get very excited, but initially sometimes there are initial plans can be too ambitious. They'll say, oh, right, we're going to do 5 or 7 pieces of content per month, you know, a couple per week. And they struggle to produce that from a standing start, from producing virtually no content. So I'd say take it slowly, start off with maybe 1 or 2 bits of content per month, learn from that, and then improve it and start to produce a bit more, but just enjoy it and have fun. I think, I always think, you know, there's various, the big consultancies will probably have all these complex matrices for how to review your thought leadership and content and produce it and quantify the return on investment and how popular it is with customers. But basically, I think unless you enjoy producing the content that you're, unless you enjoy producing your blogs, your white papers, then your readers aren't going to enjoy it. So just, and it's not, we're not talking about, you know, the Pentagon Papers or some, you know, make or break legal case or M&A. You know, just have fun, make sure it's accurate, it's clear, and it's interesting, and just publish it. Don't dither too much.
Accountants having fun. We heard it here. You said you're not a fan of the phrase thought leadership, Nick. Is there a better phrase for this?
Yeah, I mean, it could just be something like, you know, thought discussion starter or thought provoker, or I don't know. It's just the problem I have with thought leadership is it's almost slightly, well, first of all, it doesn't make sense. It's nonsensical, because how can you lead thought? And what's the definition of a thought leader? For me, it's just, you know, someone who's like, how do you quantify that? It's just someone who's seen as an authority. And when something big happens in your industry, you think, I wonder what this person thinks. Just like, you know, you might think, I wonder what one of your favorite writers or musicians or even sports people thinks about something. So it's a bit of a nonsensical term, but now everyone's latched onto it. And I think perhaps if people think about it more as, we're going to sort of start some really interesting discussions and debates about something, rather than having to provide some definitive view on AI or the future of the advisory services in accounting or whatever. Let's just start the debate going, and let's not try and align every single piece of content we do with our 5-year marketing plan, or with what Jane or Bob thinks in sales or whatever, because then you just get all this quite promising material watered down, and or it never gets signed off because people get paranoid that it's not in total alignment with your firm's strategy.
I understand you're saying don't be too definitive, but one of the problems I see with the content out there is that it is too bland, it's too safe, it's mere commentary on what is already happening. It might provide some insight or views, but it's certainly not declarative, it's not definitive, it's bland. It's not even controversial or edgy. It doesn't give people anything beyond what they already know. So it just adds to the hubris, if you like. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, those are some two common problems, weaknesses of a lot of, probably the majority of thought leadership content marketing that I see that's produced by businesses, including accounting firms. I think, and again, this is a big sweeping generalization, but I think accounting firms, by their very nature, particularly ones that do a lot of audit and compliance, are very cautious and detail orientated. And so they're a bit reluctant sometimes to stick their neck out and give strong opinions, because they think everything has to be backed up by evidence. And yeah, of course, you've got to have a reasoned argument to back up what you say and some evidence, but some of it is speculative, particularly if you're talking about the future. And yeah, if you just have a beginning, a muddle, and an end for your blog, no one's going to read till the end of it, or if they do, they'll forget about it. So I think it's good to sort of have strong opinions, and even if they change over time. But most thought leadership will be largely opinion based. I mean, some things are more analytical and instructive, but there's got to be strong opinion there. And as long as you can back up what you say, and there's some reasoned argument, and that's fine. I think that the problems often happen when too many people in a business